Good evening and welcome to Zion's Banner. We have a very special show. Raymond the Large says he's glad to see me responding to Tovia, but I won't be doing it alone. We've got a special guest. There he is, Jeffrey, spelled with a G, or Goy for Jesus. Now, as usual, I want to get us kind of started and tagged in. We've got a lot of cool resources because Jeffrey has brought some resources with him, and I have the ever popular PowerPoint. And so we're going to be doing some jumping between resources and screen shares. So the first thing I want to do is we always let our detractors speak. And then we are not talking about what we think they've said. You get to hear them in their own words. And so I'm going to go ahead and get that ready to go. I am going to pull up the PowerPoint, though. Why do I do that? Because I just like PowerPoints, and I got to introduce you to my little artificial associate here. There we go. It should have been on slideshow. There we go. From beginning. There we go. And I just want to introduce you to our friend here, Michelle, who will be asking questions during my time. But, that's my style. So let me go ahead and stop the screen share and bring up Tovia. But, Michelle's asking how Tovia gets Matthew wrong. And we're going to see how he really kind of butchers some of Matthew and gets the wrong ideas. And then we're going to go ahead and look at the right ideas, because that's what we want to come away with and understand the difference and how we get to the right ideas by asking the right questions. So let me stop that. Let me go ahead and escape from, there we go. And let's let Tovia make his case. During that time period, you're not going to hear me or Jeff. We're going to let just Tovia do his thing. Kudos to Jeff for getting me these clips so neatly.
I'll have to send you the website I used. It's pretty easy.
That's good, because I've been using like AVS, and I'm really not very happy with it. So, of course, my son's working on getting me a Mac Track thing here. So let's put Tovia up. I'm going to get him set up here. Okay, let's let Tovia be amazing in just a second here. We want to go ahead and screen share Tovia and go ahead and share the audio. So here's clip one of Tovia in his own words. We don't make this stuff up. This is really him, live and contrived, Tovia Singer.
Okay, we got time for one more caller, Rob?
Sure.
Okay, great. Okay. All right, caller, you're live on the air. Please tell us your name and where you're calling from. Oh, hold on.
Hi, my name's Ray, and I'm wondering about something. My thought is that if supposedly it's said in two of the New Testament books that all of the blood of all the righteous prophets from Abel and onward would be put upon that generation of Jews, then they would be paying for the sin of the people who actually committed those murders. And therefore, Jesus couldn't have died for the sins of those particular murderers. In fact, their guilt payment would be paid for by that generation. And so therefore, Jesus wouldn't be the savior. That generation would be the savior. And so the concept of Jesus being the savior of the world is kind of like voided if someone else is able to pay for that sin. My name's Raymond, and I'm from Tennessee, and that's my question, my thought.
Okay, Rabbi, do you have that question wrapped up?
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead and hang up. Now you continue for your answer. Thank you. Okay, Rabbi, go ahead. Please, if you would just kind of repack that for me.
So the caller is making a reference to a number of places, but most prominently to Matthew 23 verse 34 and 35. Toward the end of the chapter, Jews have paid a very high price for that chapter because it's a chapter that just a tirade, a screed against the Jews and Jewish leadership. And it sort of reaches a crescendo in Matthew 23, in verse 34 and 35, where we're told that Jesus is speaking here. If you had a red letter Bible, those words are being read, where essentially the Jews are told by Jesus that you're responsible for all the blood of all the innocent people who have died, and the blood is upon you, and God's fury is upon you. And then the astonishing, it says that from the blood of the righteous Abel until Zechariah, the son of Berechiah. That is astounding. So I can answer your question really fast. Fast. It doesn't say there that the Jews are suffering or they died as a vicarious atonement for the Jews. It's really, so that answers your question. It doesn't say that, but it is astounding because, Christians weren't nuts. They hated us, and it made complete sense why they hated us. They read screeds like this, and they thought, of course they would think that the Jews are the worst people in the world. What we are told Jesus says here, I don't know what he said or if he said any of this, but what Matthew says is that we're responsible for the death of Abel. That's the first person ever murdered in history. To Zechariah, the son of Berechiah. That means the Jews are responsible for everything. It means the Jews killed Abel? Just soak that in. If you think I'm making this up, please look it up for yourself, okay? So we're responsible for the first death in the Bible to the last death in the Bible. And that's why everything is coming on you. Even though we didn't kill Abel and a whole bunch of these other things. This is where these
Okay, I've stopped sharing for a second. There's another clip here with Tovia, but I want you to see that he's making his first case. Now, the guy called basically to ask whether there could still be vicarious atonement as far as Messiah, if indeed the Jewish people were responsible for that. But instead of just answering that, he decides to go ahead and go into this whole thing about mistakes. And you're going to see more of this. And then how poisonous this text is. Now, Raymond the Large is already making good points that are going to be said tonight. And I'll bring those in. But I want to get the second clip so that I can get Jeff on to start dealing with the passage as far as this argument. So I'm going to go to clip 2 just to set the stage for Jeff. He's going to go ahead, and then from there, we'll kind of work it from there. So let me get Tovia up here. Okay, so let me get him up here and get the screen share on here. Okay, don't worry, this isn't too long. You've almost like had your fill of Tovia, I bet, but that's okay. We'll make it work here.
And they were inspired to put in all this, the most silly mistakes, so that anyone who wanted to know the truth would go, whoa, this stuff is so weird. It's so riddled with just simple mistakes. And, someone could have corrected. It's not like Christians had a thing about correcting their books. They corrected them a lot, meaning they inserted a lot of stuff in. The Johannian comma earlier, the last 12 passages of the book of Mark. So the earliest gospel will have a resurrection account. The adulterous woman in John 7 and 8. Believe me, Christians didn't have a problem of playing with their books. Okay, the whole thing where in Luke, where Jesus says, "Forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." A lot of manuscripts don't have it because early scribes didn't like the idea that Jesus forgave the Jews. The point is, early Christian doctors had no problem of tampering with their own text. I'll tell you something that's even stranger. We often think about how the New Testament altered, the writers of the New Testament altered the Jewish scriptures. Here's the good news of Tovia Singer.
Okay, I'm going to let Jeff take it away and give us the bad news related to Tovia Singer as far as this text. Now, I'm going to get out of this thing here so that I can put the resources that Jeff needs, and I'm going to be his legs and arms. Okay.
All right. So the first thing you need to know is don't learn textual criticism from Tovia Singer. I just needed to mention that. That's not the point of our conversation tonight, but when he, they're just manipulating text and throwing stuff in any way they feel like. Bart Ehrman doesn't go that far, I don't think so. So don't get your textual criticism information from Tovia. So the main argument he was using, and part of the video we didn't show, was, and I've come to this text mainly through canon issues with Roman Catholicism. So this Abel to Zechariah passage comes into play a lot there. And if you go to my channel, the Goy for Jesus, I have a whole playlist just on Abel to Zechariah, which will go over more information. But so the argument is in terms of canon, and Tovia recognizes this, is that when you say from Abel to Zechariah, it's like saying Genesis to Revelation. But in Jewish terms, it's saying Genesis to Second Chronicles. So it's kind of it's a bookend argument, from saying all the blood from, the beginning of the Bible to all the prophets from the first prophet to the last prophet who's mentioned in the Bible, who's martyred, are going to fall on your head. So, but what he says is that, okay, so you have Zechariah ben Berechiah. Well, Zechariah ben Berechiah is a reference to the minor prophet, the canonical Zechariah, who wrote the book of Zechariah. And that is an error, because this is the Zechariah of Second Chronicles. And this is also, you'll also see this mentioned as an error in a lot of secular scholarship. So from when you're dealing with Catholics, they don't want it to be the Zechariah of Second Chronicles, because they don't want to have the traditional Jewish canon be because they want to include the apocryphal books, the Deuterocanon, as they call it. And more liberal Christians, theologically liberal Christians, and more people on the skeptical side just want it to be an error. So there's a classic book called by Robert Beckwith. I know his last name is Beckwith. I'm skipping on his first name now. Oh, here it is. Roger Beckwith. This is the book. The Old Testament Canon of the New Testament Church. And it had an argument that went back into Talmudic sources. So what it is, Jeff, if you could bring up Psalm 34.
Okay, let me bring my cursor over there. Psalm 34. And I'm going to screen share at that point, okay?
Yeah, sure. I'll see it when it's up, I think.
Okay. Let me get that for you. Go to Psalm 34. Was there a particular verse in Psalm 34 you want highlighted?
I want the preface or the first verse, depending on the translation.
Then that shows, so that should be good. I'm going to go to a square screen share. I'm going to float the other panel so they can see it better. Is that okay?
Okay, that's fine. I don't need to be on screen or anything.
No. I'm gonna see if I can make it better for them by floating the other panel.
Yeah, I have a face for radio, and a voice for newspaper, so that's fine.
Okay. Okay, that'll make it bigger for them, and that should do it. And it should have title up there.
Okay. Let me put you into full screen so I can see it too. Okay, so if you go up to the preface, a Psalm of David when he pretended madness before Abimelech, who drove him away and he departed.
There you go. That should be better.
Okay, so there's a rabbinic practice. I don't know if there's a technical name for it in the rabbinic studies, but it's basically name conflation. And what happens is, and this was, there was a rabbinic scholar in the 1900s named Z.H. Chahez who identified this, and maybe some other people before him, but he's the one Beckwith references, is that a lot of times, or at least sometimes in rabbinic literature, when you have two people of similar characteristics, so that could be they both are in the same place, they both share similar nature, or they have kind of name characteristics that are similar. You shove the names together to refer to both of them. So what you see here is maybe the first known example of this, at least time-wise, where Abimelech is actually a Canaanite king. So same kind of Canaanite king in the time of Abraham, I believe mentioned in Genesis 22. Achish is the king in, Canaanite areas and Philistine areas, in who was where David pretended he was mad before Achish. So you have a similar name. Maybe they both begin with the Hebrew letter Aleph or something. They have similar structure where they're both kings in, Philistine, Canaanite, roughly, you can see how the connections are made in thought patterns. So they substitute one name for the other. Does that make sense?
I'm just looking down. It doesn't look like anyone's terribly confused by that.
Okay. So instead, what Beckwith proposes is that in Matthew 23, now in Luke 11, which is the parallel passage to Matthew 23, there's name conflation going on. Is that even though Jesus in Matthew is saying Zechariah ben Berechiah, he is actually talking about the Zechariah of Second Chronicles. Now, the description in Matthew 23, where he's killed within the temple, matches what we have in the Jerusalem Talmud and the Babylonian Talmud. And it matches what we have in Second Chronicles. So almost everybody agrees that that's the right identification, except for Catholics who want to keep open the possibility of the Apocrypha. Catholics just want to throw doubt on the whole issue, so you'll rely on the church to have the correct canon, or at least Catholic apologists. Actually, some Catholic scholars, even the footnotes of their Bible, will, at least in Luke 11, they'll recognize that it's the right Zechariah Second Chronicles. In Matthew, the Catholic online Bible will actually say it's Zechariah the minor prophet. So Catholic scholarship is not quite as conservative as it was 100 or so years ago. Okay, so if you now the coup de grace for Beckwith's argument, could you bring up the Targum of Lamentations?
Working on that right now. Let me put that up. There you go.
Could you scroll down to chapter 2, verse 20? If you just search for the word Zechariah, it will show up.
Not real easy to do.
Okay, the full stop. There you go.
What, right there?
Yeah, right there. You got it. Where it says, "See, O Lord." All right, let's. I'll read verse 20 off your screen. See, O Lord, and observe from heaven against whom you have turned. Thus it is right for the daughters of Israel to eat the fruit of their wombs due to starvation. The lovely boys wrapped in fine linen, the attribute of justice, replied and said, is it right to kill a priest and prophet in the temple of the Lord? as when you killed Zechariah, son of Edo, so Ben Edo, the high priest and faithful prophet in the temple of the Lord on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. So that's mentioned in the Talmud a lot, in both the Jerusalem, I believe, and in the Babylonian Talmuds, that the Zechariah of Second Chronicles was killed on Yom Kippur in the temple because he admonished you not to do evil before the Lord. Okay. So, but what you'll notice is this is an example of the name conflation used in the Targum. So, but the issue. So, I talked to the person who actually translated this, and he Dr. Christian Brady. I believe he's an Anglican. I think on the liberal side. So his view was that this was a mistake on the Targum's part, but he didn't know if it was an intentional mistake, like if it was the name conflation or not. But he would say that by the time you get to Jesus, this was a tradition that you would use Zechariah ben Edo or Zechariah son of Berechiah to reference the Zechariah of Second Chronicles. So, so essentially, this name conflation possibility is a very strong possibility because we see its practice back in Psalm 34. We see it in other rabbinical literature for other figures, and then we see it right here for the same exact person in the Targum. So when Jesus is saying from Abel to Zechariah, and in Matthew from Abel to Zechariah ben Berechiah, that it's not a mistake. And Tovia goes on and on and on about how the Lord confused the Christians' minds to put such an obvious error in their own scriptures for anyone who has any intelligence whatsoever that they can find out. But what's really weird is that if he was more familiar with actual rabbinic practice, ancient rabbinic practice, he wouldn't have made this mistake. And I find it hard after 20 some years of arguing. And I know Dr. Michael Brown has mentioned this. Dr. Brown doesn't use this particular argument, and maybe this only came up because of people who are interested in arguing the canon with Catholics like I am. But I don't understand how... I don't want to call Tovia dishonest without knowing he's dishonest, but I find it hard to believe he isn't aware of this Targum making the same mistake, quote unquote mistake. So it shows a little, if he's not being dishonest, then it does show a very big error on his part in just not knowing the rabbinic background of what he's talking about. So anyway, that's the argument. It goes to the canon, the structure of the canon, for when, and this rabbinic background shows that Matthew was not making a mistake, and hence Jesus was not making a mistake. Thanks. My dog likes to bark at anything that walks by. Sorry.
Okay, so let's just kind of condense that down. You've laid it out absolutely brilliantly, showing a conflation in other places, and pointed out that at least in the Targum, and I've talked about the Targums and how useful they are, that this sort of conflation occurs. And so we can go ahead and we can know two things. We can know that this is not a mistake on Jesus's part, but actually a rabbinical device that seemed to be prevalent at the time, given the date for the Targums and the fact that they were used in the synagogues alongside the Hebrew text during Jesus's day. And so we can see that if we don't want to just say dishonest, and some people do, in listening to his debates with Michael Brown and some other incidents, let's just put it this way. If he's not dishonest, he's woefully uneducated about his own area.
Well, I can't imagine this hasn't been brought to his attention by someone at some point. And maybe not the name conflation part, because I've noticed like a ton of people haven't been introduced to this. Like, to me, like the eye opener besides the Targum of Lamentations is seeing it in Psalm 34. But even if you want to just say, hey, the name conflation thing is a possibility, then if you're arguing, I understand Catholics not caring about it or whatever, but if you're arguing from a traditional Jewish point of view, you want to be fair with your own. You're arguing against something that the Targum does. So I don't know. It just makes Tovia's argument. It's one thing, and when I talk about this with Catholics, they just don't have the background in Jewish apologetics to know what to do with this usually. But I just have a hard time believing Tovia hasn't run into this before.
Well, and there are good reasons to go ahead and believe that, this would be something that would at least be in the line of something that he could understand, and it would be information available to him. I'm just trying to redock the panel here, just so that I can not have to play with it later. Let's talk about some of the other things, because there are a few things Tovia does that he almost always does that aren't directly related to textual criticism, but they aren't very legitimate either. And so I'm going to bring up my stuff here. Now, if you want more stuff on textual criticism, and I have to admit that, I had to do that in seminary and some of that stuff. I usually go after a few other things. Feel free to go to Jeff's Goy for Jesus. You just look it up on YouTube. Probably most of you are familiar. But what I want to do is I want to put a plug in. I really appreciate him having as a, being on as a guest, and I'm willing to do that with other people. I love the cross-pollination dialogue thing that goes on.
Yeah, I'm not into empire building. I just want to expand the kingdom. I don't care who gets clicks and whatever.
So let me and I appreciate that. Now Raymond the Large made some great comments, and see, when you guys make great comments, you are the community here. And so I'm going to go back up. He mentioned that Matthew's a Jewish book, and
yeah. And I just to interrupt there, I think that's a main reason why Matthew uses that device and Luke does not. Why?
And that makes sense. It makes sense, and you're going to see those scribal traditions. And so now I'm going to speak as a Jewish guy. Jewish people don't necessarily know that when they're listening to Tovia. So you understand that the average Reformed Jew is not going to have this background.
Well, and I don't know. Would even an average Orthodox Jew, because we're talking about practices from like 2,000 years ago.
They might have a little more familiarity, because if they're reading commentaries by Rashi and such, it'll be discussed slightly. But that would be your highly educated Orthodox Jewish person, not even necessarily your person of strong practice, but also your reader kind of guy. And so, yeah, I don't know, what percentage of just. What I'm saying is that a Jewish audience is not going to necessarily have had this pointed out to them. They're going to take Tovia's word for it. See, and that's what really bothers me, is if Jewish people being fed something by someone who claims authority. And so when I run into this sort of thing, and I've had comments on my station from some Tovia fans, not many, they don't stick around too long, but I had a great banter with a woman. And she made all sorts of claims. And then when I went through and showed her from her own sources, her only comment was that I would have made a good rabbi. Well, we could take that up later. My parents might have been more comfortable with that. Let's go to something that I really do think is important. It's a point that Michael Brown makes all the time. And that's this thing of equal weights and measures.
Yeah, that's wherever that's important, whatever you're doing in apologetics, you do want to use equal weights and measures when you're critiquing someone. Like whether it's pointing out contradictions, right? You don't want to use a different standard to use to defend the Bible than what you use against some other source or whatever. And I think what you're pointing out, I don't know if you're going to point this out, but like Tovia just completely tries to poison the well.
Yeah, and that's what I'm going to try to get to, but my screen is just frozen. StreamYard has all of a sudden ended up doing
you played the first clip from earlier where
no, that's not the point. When I went to do the screen share,
oh, gotcha.
I am totally like frozen, and I'm like terrified of what happens if I refresh the screen.
Oh well, we can just talk about it if you want them. I think we have we could summarize what was already played.
Well, let's see if it ever gets back to. I wish that it would let me go back to where I was going, at least, and cancel the screen share. What I need is a feed from my audience. Are you guys still getting something in? Are you still getting something in your side? So just give me a. Man, I wish I could just open this to I just shrunk it down to see if refreshing it will help. And of course it didn't. So I don't know if StreamYard's still broadcasting or not. And I can't see you guys to go ahead. I'm trying to see if I can create a new tab. Okay. And get there that way. So let me not going to do it. It was going so great. Okay. I don't know why. It won't even let me.
You seem to be talking. You're good.
Okay. Am I moving around or am I frozen?
I could see your mouth moving and talking.
Okay.
I could hear it.
Then it's just a problem up on my screen, and maybe it'll clarify it, and maybe it won't clarify it. I went to do the screen share and I double clicked, so it must have sent the wrong thing. Let's talk about rabbinical documents that contain these sorts of conflations and errors. And let's just go ahead and do that for a few minutes. Because see, I think, as you pointed out, equal weights and measures, whatever you charge the New Testament with, you have to look at the same criteria as far as the rabbinical writings. And I would have liked to have shown them Barachot 3b, which Dr. Brown points out in his Answering Jewish Objections, New Testament Objections, Volume 4, page 115. He talks about errors like this in the rabbinical texts and says that you really can't poke fun at one without creating trouble as far as the other. And so in Barachot, which is an early tractate, 3b, at least as far as we know, he points out that after Ahithophel, who was Jehoiada's son of Benaiah, and Abiathar, the captain of the king's host, was Joab, whereas the text was Benaiah's son of Jehoiada, who was mentioned in 2 Samuel 20:23. The quote's wrong. The quote is actually wrong here. The way they state this in Barachot 3b is inaccurate. It's a different person than what they're stating. When we look at 1 Chronicles 27:34, Ahithophel was succeeded by Jehoiada, son of Benaiah, and by Abiathar. Joab was the commander of the royal army. Now, that's not the way it's stated there, and you can't see it because I can't bring it up, which I'm not quite sure why that's going on.
Would you say it's an example of name conflation, or I guess sometimes it's hard. Like the Targum kind of helps us with the Lamentations. You can't go back in time, fire up the DeLorean, and be like, "Hey, did you make an error, or were you intentionally doing name conflation?" Sometimes the name conflation, like in Psalm 34, is more obvious because Achish and Abimelech are similar names and similar positions and similar areas. So you can
It could be, and I'm not working as much on why it happens. My point
Right,
is
yeah.
that what he's charging the New Testament with, you would have to charge his own rabbinical writings with. And that's not the only place that this occurs. And that's why I kind of wanted it. You have the same sort of thing going on. And so his point is, why didn't the Christian doctors just go ahead and fix their documents? Well, why did the sages of Israel make such blatant errors too? If you're going to go ahead and say the New Testament you should run away from because of these errors, I would argue the same is true as far as rabbinical Judaism. You should be running away from rabbinical Judaism on the same basis that that he uses.
Right. No, I agree there. He's not using equals weights and measures at all.
He's creating a standard that he doesn't want to apply to his own writings.
So, but even more than that, like with the Targum from Lamentations, it's not, we have the same exact reference in rabbinical literature and in Matthew.
Right. I'm not so much analyzing why it happens. I think you did a good job with that.
Well, no, I'm saying not just why, but it's like that. It's not just like, okay, let's say the rabbis did a different name or name conflation or even an error somewhere else, but we're saying this exact switching the Zechariah from Zechariah, son of Jehoiada of Second Chronicles, and switching him for Zechariah ben Iddo is exactly what Matthew and the Targum do. It's like the same exact person and the same exact switch. So I can't think that's coincidence. So he would have to argue against the Targum.
Yes, and that's my point, is that he has no problem when rabbinical writings do it, but he has a terrible problem, when it's the New Testament. And why the double standard? Because I don't like one and I like the other.
Well, I guess it also gets to a question of his honesty.
Well, see, that's also the issue.
And I can't. Again, I don't want to accuse. I don't want to say I know he's lying when I don't actually know he's lying. But he's either lying or really dropping the ball really badly, given his the fact that he's a rabbi who's doing anti-missionary work. This is something like a 20-year-old YouTuber should. Okay, I could accuse you for making this mistake, but not someone who's been in this business, quote unquote business, for like 30 years or more.
Yeah. I was just going ahead and pulling my phone up so that I could actually see what was going on and monitor us. So you'll have to just pardon me for doing that, but that gives me a second monitor, so that I can actually see you guys' comments and stuff. Never ever double click your screen sharing in StreamYard. So I learned something tonight. Yeah, and that's my point here is, my first point is this equal weights and measures. And by the way, it happens all over the place. I mean, it happens in later places like Genesis Rabbah 64:5, which does a thing here where it mentions Hilkiah and Jezebel together, but they were separated by several centuries. Okay.
Right. And that seems like that would be a natural name conflation there. I should mention, just this is like a little bit of a tangent, but there's a alleged, let's say just a Bible difficulty that Bart Ehrman likes to bring up, which is Jesus in Mark chapter 2 mentions Abiathar the priest or something like that, or in the time of Abiathar the priest, I think. And it is possible that the resolution to that Bible difficulty is that Jesus was using a name conflation there. So I just wanted to say, once you're aware that this was a rabbinic practice, this might be something that can solve a few other things, or let you know that that this is going on.
And again, my main point is that again, if you're going to go ahead and place this standard on the New Testament, you equally validly have to do that with the Talmud, which puts Tovia in a very awkward position, because he would then have to say that the rabbinical writings in Judaism didn't correct such glaring errors either.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious if I could, if I find the time. I know it would be like a Sunday morning or something to call into a show and see if he'd actually take a question on this.
Well, I think he screens it so that he ends up looking real good.
Well, that's one thing. I called Catholic Answers in the fall, and that's one thing I noticed, is that if you have control of the mute button, you can do pretty well. You can do pretty well for yourself in a conversation.
Yeah, well, the person who controls the discussion wins the argument, right? I've always told people that that's why you question the premise of your interlocutor, and you always question the premise.
Well, if they can just talk over you, that helps too.
Yeah, well, it does.
I mean, it doesn't give you a good conversation, but
it's his show, so he gets to write the rules. But, the reality is we can respond to that, and, that's the sort of thing that Tovia used to do with him, and he doesn't debate anymore, But the funny thing is that the version of the Talmud itself, and that's why I wish I could kind of show this, actually has a footnote explaining that this is an anachronism. The two didn't live at the same time period. So you have a footnote in the Sanchino version of Genesis Rabbah that notes that this is problematic. They didn't correct their writings, but the Sanchino was smart enough to go ahead and say this was wrong. Why not just correct the writing according to Singer's, sort of argumentation? I'm getting some comments here, and I always give people.
Yeah, I see a question from Slam.
Yeah, which I'd really like to deal with. Slam, normally I just post this so everyone can see it.
Yeah, I don't know if that's a registered nurse or right now or what that is, but she's absolutely wonderful. She asks really tough questions, and we have a blast with the questions and the back and forth. She says the original name conflation, a mistake which was repeated elsewhere, such as the New Testament. So I think she's asking whether this got into the New Testament because it was something that existed in other places. Okay, so I would say that the name conflation is intentional, and it is also a common practice. So when it was done in the Targum, I don't believe it was an error. And when Jesus did it, it was a common practice at that time. Now, Dr. Brady, Dr. Christian Brady, who, if you read an English translation of the Targum of Lamentations, you are reading Dr. Brady's work. He did it for his doctoral thesis. I've read the pertinent sections about this section in his doctoral thesis, and I actually talked with him via private message on social media. He is of the belief that, and again, I think he's theologically liberal. So that's where I put him on the spectrum. He is of the belief that it was an error for the Targum. When he says an error, he doesn't mean it was unintentional. It could be name conflation, but he just doesn't know 100%. He just doesn't know if it was name conflation or an error, is what he would say. But what Dr. Brady would say is that by the time Jesus used it, and this is, again, in correspondence with me, that by the time Jesus used it, it was a common practice. So even if it was originally an unintentional error by the Targum, by the time it got to the time of the New Testament, that people wouldn't be using it as an unintentional error. They'd be using it as maybe a practice that crept in.
Okay. So the bottom line is this at least had become regular practice by the time of Jesus.
Yeah, but I would be inclined to, again, Dr. Brady doesn't rule out name conflation. He's a scholar of like ancient Second Temple, like rabbinic works and stuff. He just doesn't take a position, but he says name conflation is a possibility in the Targum.
Now, one of the things that we've been pointing out here is this moves from the Targum to the Talmud, and these are two different writings. When we start talking with the Mishnah, we're talking about some early tractates, and I remember doing rabbinical literature with Akiva Cohn. Some tractates are very early, particularly the ones with Hillel and Shammai, but the codification of Mishnah with Gemara doesn't occur until 600 to 800 AD. So when you're talking about the Targums, you're talking about the time of Jesus, roughly 50 BC or BCE, if you want to be very Jewish about it. But when you're starting to talk about Talmud, you're talking about later rabbinical writings where there would have been even more time to correct these things.
Right.
So now you're getting into a period of time where you're approaching, and I've used this with Islamic, that really you have a lot of evidence for Muhammad being influenced by the Babylonian Academy, which was codifying the Babylonian Talmud at around 600, which is really 500, right around that time period. And so this sort of practice goes back to the Targanim, which precedes Jesus and continues clear into the 500 AD to 800 AD range. And there was plenty of time for the rabbis to go ahead and correct this, and they didn't. So the charge becomes even worse because one could argue that the Christians could have corrected a writing, around 50, 60 AD before, but, you have rabbinical writings that continue to perpetuate the same error clear into the 800 AD range. And what Rabbi Singer is claiming is that when these writings don't fix these mistakes over a period leading to 800 AD, that's somehow acceptable because they're rabbinical writings and it's Judaism. But when the New Testament does it, and does not do it necessarily clear to that time period, because we have New Testament manuscripts that predate that 600 AD, that's not okay.
Well,
so
he
I
also
want you to see the enormity of the double standard here.
Well, he also doesn't quite have a good handle on textual criticism, where he thinks that Christians would just willy-nilly just make changes to the text because they thought they saw a problem or something like that. And there are some examples in textual criticism where something's in Luke and not in Matthew or something like that. So maybe some scribe somewhere does something that matches the language when he shouldn't have, and then you see it corrected back and all. It gets kind of complicated, and it's not my area of expertise, but it's not as loosey-goosey as Tovia makes it out to be.
Slam asks, would someone want to force the two texts together, especially names at different time periods, for theological reasons? Now I'm going to comment on that a little. What you will see is the writer doing an intertextual point in order to highlight a concept or spiritual truth. We know that occurs. I mean, I could point to that where you have certain techniques, and particularly the fact that during the New Testament period, some of the rabbinical interpretive techniques were being used as the disciples, as the writers of the New Testament, were viewing things through a messianic lens. So I'd say that there might be cases in which those texts are dealt with that way to highlight something, not so much as a mistake. You see this where several prophets are quoted with the same theme or general idea, and then one prophet is named because these prophets line up to make the same point.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a good example of not so much the name conflation, but maybe it's like its neighbor or something like that. And that, well, you could see with the Achish Abimelech one where they're conflating them on purpose, and they have similar characteristics, and you could see why they would pick those two to conflate, right? Achish and Abimelech. One's dealing with David, one's dealing with Abraham, but their ultimate motivation, I'm not sure I'm capable of saying a few thousand years later and in retrospect why you would do that. Like I'm not entirely sure what the motivation was.
Well, the rabbis do it in order to draw certain parallels because they
Right.
believe that the history of Israel unfolded and that patterns repeat themselves. So
Okay.
you might have Rome being referred to as Haman in rabbinical writings. And you generally do that because the idea is Haman is a quintessential enemy of Israel. So every time there's a quintessential enemy of Israel, he's Haman squared. Okay? That sort of thinking. Okay? And so they would do that as far as motif, because remember what we've said on this channel, we're dealing with God's big story, and for the Jewish person, theology is wrapped in narrative. So it's not like the Greeks. Yeah. It's not as prepositional. It's more narrative.
It's not that they're anti-propositional, but it's more narrative based.
Yeah, I'm not saying. Well, the prepositional truth is contained in the patterns of the narrative as well as certain statements. When we look at something like the Shema, it's a clear statement related to allegiance and what's owed God, and it's pretty clear. But when you're dealing with a pattern, and so the rabbis would often play on patterns, and so it's not unlikely that the New Testament writers interacting with it's not quite rabbinical Judaism, it'd be called formative Judaism, would take advantage of that to highlight the messianic perspective. And Michael Rydelnik points this out, and some of the other writers point this out, that this is a way of highlighting things. I do want to get to the poisoning the well part, though, because
that's where I think you definitely take the lead. But that was pretty bad.
You know, I'm so glad, and I'd like to stick Raymond's comment up there. It's great having someone else on and having it work. It's just sad that the browser locked when it did, because I love sticking your comments up there. And so I'll probably get the browser allowing your comments, but I won't have the joy of having someone else on at the same time. I got to get both working at the same time. The cool thing is we're still transmitting. So, StreamYard has scrambled to make this work. Let's just go into the poisoning of the well. Raymond the Large said Matthew as far as a Jewish writing. And this is something that Tovia repeatedly does. The man ignores history, which is irritating to me because I have a love of history.
Yeah, he recently did that with a virgin birth video where he kind of ignored that Luke was associated with Paul.
Yeah. And so I want to borrow from Jewish writers to point this out. The Christians were observant Jews at the beginning of this movement. Now, I admit that the church becomes less Jewish as the gospel spreads throughout the Roman Empire. But what he's deliberately ignoring is, notice how he says the Christians, as if they were a foreign religion and a totally other unassociated group, in order to distance. And so what I want to point out, and I like using Jewish writers to do this, because then he can't accuse me of finding biased Christian sources. I went to Chaim Poltok, who he's not exactly a historian, but he's a much beloved Yiddish writer. And I pulled out Wanderings, which is his history of the Jews, 1986. There emerges from an impartial reading. Listen to these words: an impartial reading of the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. The picture of a Jew who is probably a rabbinical student, a Pharisee become preacher and wonder worker, taught a gentle ethic, not unlike that on the level of Hillel. You know, he goes a little more detailed than I wanted to. And in the final year of his all too brief life, felt himself to be at first a prophet and then Messiah, and became an apocalyptic Pharisee. Now, what I want you to see from that is Chaim Poltok is saying that these guys all were in the pale of Judaism when this movement starts. So it's not the Jews and you Christians. It's one sect of Judaism talking to another. Now I'm going to highlight this, and then I'm going to refer to some work I did when I was getting my Master's of Divinity as far as intersectarian arguing in the Second Temple period, because this was not uncommon. This is Simon Grizel. His book for history is what we used when we covered Jewish history. He is considered a Jewish historian. It must be remembered. Now, listen to his words. This is not me. Tovia, you need to do some reading of some Jewish authors. This is Simon Grizel. It must be remembered that everybody, Jews, Christians, and Romans still looked upon Christianity as a sect of Judaism. Page 172, A History of the Jewish People, Simon Grizel. And guess who published this? I love who published this. You want irony? This was published by the Jewish Publication Society of America. So at no time during the writing of the Gospels did anyone, including Judaism itself, look at Christians as anything other than a sect of Judaism. Tovia, we're talking about disagreements between two sects of existing Judaism at the time. If you're going to put this back in its historic perspective, when these writings were written, you need to put this back in its historic perspective. And what you're talking about is intersectarian conversations within the community of Israel at the time of Jesus. And stop pretending, stop looking at Christianity when you're looking at the Gospels through a post-Nicene Christianity between 300 AD and beyond. You need to put this in its framework. None of our Gospels were written at 325 AD. Okay, they're all existing before then. And so you're playing by creating a historical spin that does not exist. Now, whether you're doing so because you just don't bother to read Jewish historians and don't bother to read history, I don't know. But I think a good rabbi should know a little bit about Jewish history. And, you know, if you need a few bucks to get a copy of Simon Grizel, I think somebody could probably do that for you. Okay? Now, what's going on here? I also included Marv Wilson. By the way, if you guys want a good book, The Jewish Roots of the Christian Faith, Our Father Abraham by Marvin Wilson is absolutely wonderful. My son, when he was at school down in Massachusetts, actually had him as a professor. So that's pretty cool. He makes two comments, you know. He comments that the Jews were referred to as the sect of the Nazarenes because they followed Jesus of Nazareth, the sect. That's Acts 24:5, where the Jewish leaders are actually, Paul is saying, which they call a sect. So Paul is saying that Judaism recognizes their movement as an aberrant sect of Judaism. And then, you know, the discussion of Hebrews is all within the context of inheriting the promises and the legitimacy of what was considered to be a sect of Judaism. Yes, it was considered heretical, but it was a heretical sect of Judaism, not a foreign religion that was come up with by Constantine, which is the way Tovia always presents Christianity, and it's not legitimate. And so when I'm talking to a Jewish person, they start to say this, I say, look, I want to share something with you may never have thought about before, but the New Testament is actually a Jewish writing from the Second Temple era. And you need to understand that this is Jewish writing too. In fact, our professor Michael Radelnik pointed out that it needs to be stressed, even to an unsaved Jewish person, that this is a Jewish writing. Now, some people have caught on to this. Dennis Pranger recently said that the New Testament came through the Jewish people also. And he's a conservative Orthodox Jew. So, you've got...
He's unusually Christian friendly.
Well, he is unusually Christian friendly, but he's also being honest.
Yes, I'd agree with that.
Well,
you see, like, I forget, I used a clip of yours a while ago, and was begins with a B, talking about the Boynik, or I forget the guy's name, but you always have to separate, and I've learned this in dealing with Catholic apologetics. The academics seem to be way more honest than the apologists.
Okay.
I tend to see that. So when I'm reading a book from a Jewish academic, they're way more likely to talk about proto-Trinitarian doctrine in Jewish sources and things like that. And the apologists, not so much. And you see a similar dynamic when I talk to Catholic apologists, is that the academics will concede way more points and be way more honest than the apologists.
And see, what we need to do is be academically honest apologists.
Right. Yeah.
That's kind of where we need to go. There are a few questions or a few statements in the queue that are really cool.
Well, do you want to answer Tovia on... Some of it seems kind of ridiculous, where when Jesus says the blood of Abel to Zechariah, is he saying that they're responsible for killing Abel?
No. And let me bring this up. That's why I redocked it, because I knew this would come up. What you have here, okay, it's interesting that Tovia uses the word responsible. I'd say, does the Greek text say responsible? I mean, is that what you have here? You have erchomai, that may come upon you. Probably a subjunctive. Yes, it is. It's an aorist active subjunctive, which means that this is a culmination. You're going to experience the culmination of this judgment. He does not use the word you are responsible or you killed Zechariah to Abel. So, again, Tovia, I appreciate that you might know Hebrew, but what you need to understand is, guess what? Jews in the ancient world during Jesus' time actually were somewhat conversant with Greek. There was something called the Septuagint. So wake up. This is a Greek text, and you need to acknowledge what's being said in the text. The text does not use any word that indicates responsibility. It uses a word that they're going to experience the judgment related to it. Now, Paul says similar things. Okay, Paul says that, they're continuous. Stephen actually says that, you guys have always resisted the Holy Spirit. And he's not talking about every Jewish person resisting the Holy Spirit. He's talking about there's been a pattern in Israel of the majority or the nation as a whole resisting the Holy Spirit. And this language Jesus is using relates directly to the same type of language that Stephen is using in Acts. And this is part of intertestamental, interfamily polemic during the Second Temple period. You should hear what the Pharisees called the Sadducees. Okay, I mean, I did a paper on this. Josephus's language. This sort of dialogue went on between different Jewish sects all the time. It was the historical way of family yelling at each other. Call this Jewish yelling at each other. That's what this was. Okay? This was essentially that sort of polemic. And so the Greek here, using erchomai in the subjunctive, The may is the subjunctive. Okay, it's the mood of possibility, or the mood that something is likely to happen. It's the kind of mood, that this is going to happen, but it's not the mood of you've done this. Okay, if I want to say you killed every prophet from Abel to Zechariah, I would not be using the subjunctive, and I wouldn't be using the Greek word erchomai.
Now,
so the text doesn't even say that.
Now, there's a Catholic apologist who points out, I believe it's in Matthew. Let me go switch my tab. So it says, to the blood of Zechariah, son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the sanctuary and the altar. So this one Catholic apologist likes to say, okay, it's a contemporary Zechariah we've never heard of, because it says you murdered this person. And I was like, no. What's going on here is they're identifying by their actions, by them killing prophets, the prophetic witness in the present, the apostles who will be sent to them and stuff like that, and the first century Jewish Christians, is that they're identifying themselves with all the people who killed the prophets in the past. It's a little bit hyperbolic. I didn't know if you had a different take on that. I mean, we can tell it's the Zechariah from Second Chronicles based off of the identification through the Talmud and stuff like that. So I didn't know if you had a different. I found that Catholic apologist argument pretty weak.
No, it's really weak, and the idea is pattern again. You guys have filled or completed the pattern that came before you. Okay, that's very Jewish thinking. All those other guys that were doing it? Well, you just topped the icing on the cake here. Okay, you just put the last layer on the dessert. There's very much what's going on here. But Tovia is so wrong in saying, well, look, this is the cause of anti-Semitism. This isn't the cause of anti-Semitism. The first Jewish believers were all going to synagogue and to temple. I'd say, look, you did worse by kicking the Jewish believers out of the community with the curse against the heretics and adding that to the Jewish prayer book than anything else. And you shot yourself in the foot by doing that. Nobody was leaving you. Nobody was being nasty. Nobody was trying. They were going to synagogue and keeping their ethnic identities. You're the guys who pushed them out. If anything else, you created more of a division than you needed to, simply because you didn't like what they were saying. That wasn't the way to deal with that. So, see, and the same language is used in 36. Okay, will come upon you. Okay, so what are we dealing with for a Greek word there? Now, I would be showing you these Greek words if I could. Okay. But again, Heko is not you deliberately murdered Abel. And notice 37, O Jerusalem. So now he's speaking about Israel corporately, and Jerusalem in particular. You who kills the prophets. Why? Because previous prophets were rejected and reviled by the corporate whole, particularly the leadership.
Would there be a similarity, like if someone says like son of the devil, right? In the Bible, it's saying like by your behavior, you identify as, the devil is your parent. Not that you're literally the son of the devil or something.
Yeah, the word son or ben can mean disciple of, one who has the character of another or follows the teachings of another. So if you say you belong to the house of Hillel, you were a son of Hillel in a spiritual sense.
Yeah,
following the.
So it just seems to me is that the main point and thrust of this is not that they literally killed Zechariah or that they literally killed Abel, is that they are identifying with those past people who did those by participating in the same behavior.
Right. Or demonstrating the same character might be a way of looking at it.
Yeah.
Your resistance, you know, to the same thing is displaying the same heart attitude. And Slam showed me that she, again, is quite the mistress of Hebrew. She's learning Hebrew. And so she actually pulled out the Hebrew keyboard, which I sometimes do. And so kudos to Slam. I know I have to look away, Slam, when I'm looking at this. I've got this phone like as eye level to the camera as I can. We're making use with it. And by the way, I do love StreamYard. It's just a little glitch tonight. But the cool thing is it's working to have a guest on. So I'm excited.
Well, here, let me show you the magic behind my camera. Is that's what I have going on with my cats. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah, go ahead. Give us a gander. Okay.
All right, here, there they are again. There we are.
Yeah, I have the Inter Sanctum Bat Cave over here, which is just off the kitchen, that I'm working on creating. There you go. So you heard it straight from the cat. You could say you heard it from cats. That's just a little humor. Okay.
Yeah, they're not impressed with Tovia either, or anyone ever.
Well, that is sometimes the nature of felines, so that's not necessarily shocking. Okay, well, it looks like we're getting to that time when I start thinking about dinner, and we really have had a great show. We've gone over. We've had like 12 people have finally come in. I know that's not the hugest number of people here, dealing with some of the folks that I watch, but the main thing is we got an incredible audience. So it's like starting with the 10 apostles. It was 10 guys, but they changed the world. So Ben West has been on. So howdy to Ben West. He says dinner is calling. I bet. I almost want to ask him what it is.
What's the temperature in Arizona right now?
The temperature in Arizona is like 70 during the day and like 50, 60 at night. But I'm scheduled to go speak in Vermont. We have to. You guys are going to see some broadcast, Lord willing, from the lake house in Newberry, Vermont, because we have to COVID quarantine ourselves before I can speak in Vermont. So Raymond the Large says this was really good, and Ben West says stuffed mushrooms. Sounds good. And Elizabeth likes your cat. Nice.
There was 2 in there if you look closely. So remember there's an Abel to Zechariah playlist. So I'll put this in this. So if you, there's way more information I didn't get into, but the meat of everything was in here tonight.
And Brother Steve says, let's do it again sometime, which is great.
I will do the Jeff and Jeff show.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. I kind of like that, being that we have first names and they're spelled a little different. There won't be any name conflation here.
It's your mom's fault. It's not. I don't blame you.
Yeah. Hey, at least my dad went with Jeff instead of other possibilities. Okay. Thanks. Nate Nate2D2 has stuck your channel up there and told people to subscribe. He is like the king of the URL, and he stuck our Chosen People support page up. So thank you, Nate. I was going to roll the credits for you Patreon supporters. I've been doing that. But being that my screen is frozen, I will not be screen sharing anymore tonight. So apologies for that. And Air Church was here. And so we've gotten a lot of folks that just jumped in near the end. I have no idea how I'm going to stop this broadcast because I have my browser totally glitched. So I don't know any way out of this. But I'm going to say good night. I'm going to thank my guest. It was great having you on, Jeff.
Thanks for having me on. maybe we can figure out something in the future. But safe travels to Vermont.
All righty. And I don't know how to get you off either. So
I can leave.
okay.
All right.
And I'm going to
Bye-bye.
bye.